Shut up, compressor. Hey everyone, Matt here with Duke's Models, and welcome to the 1/48 scale 3D printed TIE Interceptor build. Now, so far, my entire experience with this TIE Interceptor has been as a subject to be 3D printed, and getting all the parts printed out properly, figuring out settings, climbing my way up learning curve mountain. Now that it's fully printed, it's time to start treating it as an actual kit to be built. So let's kind of break it down, see what's what, and what needs to happen first. So this kit is quite simple because I scaled up the 1/68th kit, I think it is, to 1/48th. Fortunately, the 3D models are the same across the various versions of this in terms of detail, so whether scaling down from the 1/34th or scaling up from the 1/68th, you basically have the same details like on the cockpit ball and on the solar panel wings and whatnot. Yay for that. But the 1/68th kit is substantially simpler in terms of parts count, which also makes it simpler in terms of fit. And I did make one concession to it, which was to directly integrate, I believe it was the top cap or it may have been the back cap, I can't remember which, but there's one that's like separate on this. And I incorporated them directly into this print so that everything is printing out in one piece. Cool. This means I'm giving up some of the stuff I'd hoped to do inside of the cockpit area, because I'd hoped to basically be able to come in from the top and spray in here and do some interesting sort of like fake lighting effects, you know, object source lighting type stuff in here to make this look a little bit different. That's not going to be an option because I only have one hole to spray into. So it's going to get a pretty light treatment. But then again, once you install, I think this is like a blast shield of some kind or, you know, whatnot. But basically, once you install that, and once you install the frame, and it's going to have clear parts in it, you can't really see much in there anyway. So, no big deal. So, let's start with the cockpit ball. So this is essentially the standard cockpit ball for TIE Interceptor and TIE Fighters. This one is printed out as a one-piece thing with the cannons already in it, the struts already in it, the various, you know, the rear cap, bottom cap, top cap already integrated. Everything is fun and happy. I printed this at sort of an upright orientation so that I could put all the supports basically on this one strut where they will be hidden as they mount into the wings. Got a few lighter ones back here that need some cleaning up. So that's probably the ugliest area of the print. The rest of it I think looks pretty solid. One thing that pisses me off about this kit, it pissed me off enough that I actually went and redesigned the canopy frame, because the ones that they give you, there's one that's just kind of like filled in like solid, which no. And the one that is open has essentially like, you know, very, very large frame pieces, and there's no way to put any sort of clear parts in them. So I went and redesigned the thing. Basically, the outer ring is still original from the original STLs. Everything else in there is a replacement, and it's engineered so I can put clear acetate in here and actually have windows. But yeah, another area that frustrates me on the clear parts line are these 4 windows up here, which are supposed to be clear. Now, I would also note, though, if you happen to be watching Mandalorian Season 2, when they go to get Mayfield from the junkyard where he's basically working prison labor, he's cutting up a TIE fighter, and you can see the top cap very clearly, and these things are not clear on it. They are the same dirty brown, gray, blue kind of thing as the rest of the ball. So I think I might just do that and, you know, go with the canon of these things were fared over because they were vulnerable to laser blast or something. Because honestly, the funny thing is the inside of that top cap is solid, and there is no accommodation whatsoever made for windows at all. So yeah, those are probably going to require you know, either some interesting treatment to make them look convincing as glass, or they're just going to be fared over. That's pretty much it for the cockpit ball. I mean, the main issue here is going to be cleaning up the detail in here and getting rid of some of the support dimples, but that's pretty minor. Inside of the cockpit, we have the aforementioned blast shield, whatever thing, the instrument panel combing. Pretty simple, but also, you know, it's got some nice relief detail on it. It'll be fun to kind of paint it up. Then we've got control sticks and the seat. And the seat is actually extremely well detailed. You know, quite happy with how that looks. That's a solid looking piece. Now these, funnily enough, are supposed to mount together. And this is where we run into the perennial problem with 3D printed parts. Things don't fit. So I'm either going to try sanding this down quite a bit so I can shove it in here, or honestly, I might just cut it out and glue these things in, you know, a bit more manually than having them kind of slot together. Either way, this is from the FDM print, and there's supposed to be a little triangle pyramid dealy in here for the seat to fit onto, like you can see right here. And that's not present on this. There's instead a little hole. So all I'm going to do is basically take the seat. I should probably use tweezers for this. So all I'm going to do is take the seat and basically just glue it in like that. You know, I'm not going to worry about hard fixing or any of that kind of stuff. It'll just be sitting in there. No big deal. Alright, onto the wings. The wings basically have the inverse of this like square pyramid deal. They fit just like that. They're a little bit wobbly, but it's not bad. So, cool. It's nice to have to not worry about those things fitting. The wings, however, have one thing that is going to need some substantial attention, and that is due to the fact that I made them hollow. The hollowness of them makes them easier to print because they don't weigh as much, and therefore they're easier for the supports to hold up, and they also impart less suction, so again, easier on the supports. But that also means that I have drain holes here, 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 several across the bottom, which is going, or the back, which is going to require filling. Got one here in one of these little cannon blaster holes. I've got one here, one here. So yeah, several little holes that need to be filled. I also need to do some sanding on the back side because that is where the bulk of the supports are, and as you can see, like right there, it's a little bit rough. So that'll be a task for some Goodman sanding blocks because I want that nice flat thing to going on there, and sanding sticks would just kind of curve around this, especially because this stuff is really not very flexible. So yeah, so first up is going to be filling these holes and sanding some of this stuff down. After that, I'm going to throw down some Mr. Surfacer 1000 because it's a slightly higher build primer than something like MS 1500 or MRP primer. The good thing about a higher build primer is where we do have visible layer lines, even though they're very faint, you know, like along here or along some of these, you know, printed edges, which I think I might have already swiped this thing with sanding block once or something. But let's see this. Yeah, so you can, if you get in there and hit it just right with the light, you can kind of see some 3D artifacts going on in here. So the idea would be to hit it with a heavier build primer, then sand that back, and so it will fill in the areas between the striations and level off the stuff that goes on top of them. It'll give us a nice level surface to work from. From there, it's going to be a matter of essentially painting this. And I'm still thinking through exactly what I want to do. First is going to be whipping up some masks for the solar panels, because when I did some test painting to kind of figure out colors, masking off these triangle bullshits took forever. So I figure what I'm going to do is just, you know, put this thing on a scanner like this, scan it, get those angles, cut up some mask real fast on the silhouette, and then be able to drop them in here and move a whole lot faster than I would otherwise. In terms of paint itself, so when I was testing things out, ignore these colors here, I'm not happy with these for the solar panels, but basically this is MRP Haze Gray, I think, or no, this is MRP US Navy Blue Gray, or Gray Blue. It's the darker color that goes on TPS schemes. It's also known as medium gray, I believe. And I think it gives that sort of nice blue-gray feel that late original trilogy, late Empire TIE Interceptors had. Even though I might take it to a slightly bluer tone, just because this is still very gray, and I want a little bit of personality. In terms of what I want to do with the panels themselves, I've been playing around with several different things. Up here is MRP Gunmetal, which is maybe a bit too dark and too boring. Back here is MRP Graphite, which I think might have just the right look. It's got a little bit of sheen to it. It's got a little bit of visual interest. It's not just black. It's maybe a little tiny bit dark for my taste, so I might try mixing it up with a drop or two of steel or something like that, just to see where it gets us. But yeah, overall, that's kind of where I'm heading paint-wise. You know, some sort of bluish gray, some sort of graphite-y type thing for the solar panels. For the cockpit frame and like the little lock things out on either side of the cockpit ball here, we need a slightly darker gray, so I'm thinking I might use something like maybe MRP's rather dark neutral gray, or I can even go darker than that if I want to. I'll make that decision when the time comes. So yeah, that's basically what we've got in front of us for this build. First of all, I need to get filling all of these little holes. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go see if I have any plastic stock that is 1mm. I don't think I do, but if I do, that might be a good way to start just filling this, because they go in there a ways, and you know, super glue would probably work, but it might also leave some dimples. In terms of these cannon things, I don't want to fill them in. I actually want to drill the other ones out, and I want to drill these out to a slightly wider depth. So I'm going to hope that I can get that working with some stainless steel twist drills and maybe open it up a bit. Back here, again, fill, give these things a nice smooth edge, and then I can worry about the actual surface and if I have any sort of artifacting that I need to deal with there. I'm not seeing too much though. I mean, for the most part, the layer lines are invisible on this thing. You know, there are a few places where they might show up. Shut up, compressor. But yeah, for the most part, I think we are pretty solid after a little bit of surface prep to get right into paint. So I'm going to go ahead and gather some materials, and we'll hop right back in to fill these drain holes and deal with the surface. Okay, so I managed to find this 20 thou rod, which just so happens to pretty much fit these holes exactly. I'm not going to worry about the ones on the strut mount because they will be invisible, but the ones like here and here, we definitely want to go ahead and make sure that we are filling. So I'm going to start with the back, these ones back here, and I've got some ammo black CA to help with the process. I'm going to go ahead and slide our pieces over here with the airbrush needle. Just grab some CA, shove it into the hole. Just like that. Now, it's not a perfect fill, but I basically just want to reduce the chance of the CA kind of sinking in there when I come to fill on top of it. Okay, so now that I've got the holes drilled out, and I've got all these glued in, and I've got the longer bits cut off, it's time to go ahead and add a little bit more black CA. Let this sit for a bit. Okay, while I wait for the wings to set up just a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and try to remove some of this pockmark detail on the back lower side of the cockpit ball. And for this, I'm just using a coarse sanding stick. It actually cuts through the roughness pretty well. So we're getting some nice smooth things happening. It helps that the density of the supports is only 50% of the actual resin print, so they give a lot faster. And it's already looking a whole lot better. I think this area here around the thruster is just going to be a bit fucked no matter what I do. It's the problem with 3D printing a fucking sphere. Okay, got the worst of it scoured away. Yeah, much smoothness restored. Nice. Now on some areas here like the back of the strut, we still got some visible pock marks. Cool. Cockpit ball is looking nice and clean and just about ready for primer. Now let's start looking at the wings. And I already know that there's no way I'm going to be able to get a rigid sanding block in here, so. Okay, I'm getting a bit impatient, so we're going to take some drastic measures here. Make sure these things actually get filled properly. I'm going to use some dental powder. It would help if I actually hit the target, wouldn't it? There we go. Okay, so all of the CA and dental acrylic has had some time to set up. Now it's time to go in and particularly clean up the back edge here, which, as you can see from different angles, is easily the roughest part of the wing. So for this, I've got some good sanding blocks. I'm going to start on 220, because I feel like 80 or something like that might be a bit aggressive. I don't want to do anything I can't undo. Block a little bit wet. These sanding blocks are great for holding an angle. So unlike sanding sticks, they're not flopping over the edge or any of that kind of bullshit. Which makes them ideal for this because we've got all these ridges and stuff, particularly on the diagonals. The back is pretty fine, but these diagonals have these little waves in them, and they're annoying. And a sanding stick would trip up like crazy on them, so with the world's most annoying noise too. And in the end, we end up with a nice smooth area. Except for right there. One little... We're going to come in with 320. Let's keep going. 400. And finally, let's finish up with some 600. Dear God. Could do without the dolphin calls. Sweet. Those look good. Okay. Now that we've got that shit dealt with, let's get to the rest of it. For these, I'm finding standing sticks still work. They're more maneuverable than the Goodman blocks are. So, getting in here to snipe some of these is a little bit easier. So one of the many ways that modeling a 3D printed kit is different from your standard injection styrene thing is that all the cleanup happens right out of the gate. So instead of building something and then having to deal with filling and sanding, you're doing all the filling and sanding pretty much right up front. But now we get to throw some primer at stuff. And for this, I'm going to be using some Mr. Primer Surfacer 1000. The 1000 has a bit more body to it than the 1500, which is good for filling in layer lines and things like that. This isn't so much the end of cleanup and the start of paint as it is the beginning of the end of cleanup. I mixed it with some Mr. Leveling Thinner. Get that all mixed up. I really need to get some bigger mixing cups for use with primers, because we're going to need more than one tattoo ink cup, I'm thinking. Alright, so we're going to start off with the cockpit ball. Move on and have some fun with some wings. Alright, watching me spray primer is interesting and all, but I'm going to go ahead and pause and get the first coat down, and then we'll be back to see how it's going. Okay, so the first coat of primer is down, and this is where things start to get interesting. Now, if you were watching while I was spraying, you might note that I was avoiding most of the solar panels, and that's because I don't really want to bury all of this detail, but I need to deal with the shit around it. So, essentially we have layer lines all throughout. They're not bad, but they are noticeable if you get really, really close. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here with a sanding sponge and just start knocking back the primer. And it'll knock it back over the high areas, but it'll leave it in the lower areas because of the layer lines. So basically something like this. You see that that barcode pattern kind of showing up? That's exactly what we want, because that is primer sticking in between but being knocked off the high points. And so if we do this a few times, it will drastically reduce those layer lines and make life a lot easier when we get to the painting stages. And fortunately, when we get into like the details around, you know, the wing center here and the where it joins onto the spar, there's so much going on that any layer lines kind of vanish. It's more on these big straight expanses. So that's where I'm going to focus my energy. And this, I mean, just from touch, this is already getting very smooth. Which tells me that we're taking it in the right direction. So that's good. So you can definitely see the bar coating there. And looking at the back here, I've still got some areas I need to do additional cleanup on. Filling operations didn't quite get as much as I was hoping. Because the backside has been so heavily sanded, it's not really that big of a threat for dealing with layer lines. Now, one other area that I need to address on these things is these center spars. They may look fine from a distance, but they've got some growtiness going on with a few minor support craters. And I've got some waviness down in like the back portion of them right there, but there's really not much I can do about that unless I want to try printing these again, which I'm not in a huge rush to do. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and refill the back here, sand that again, then we're going to go back to primer and rinse and repeat. Okay, so the TIE Interceptor has been through the prime and sand routine, and everything is looking pretty good. So now it is time to move on to some Mr. Surfacer 1500 Black. Okay, so I've got everything primed up in black, except for this little bit of flurm area here that I just removed, and honestly, I'm going to leave that the way it is, because there's going to be a bunch of variation going on in this thing anyway. But, got the solar panel wings all done. Everything still mounts up just fine. So now it is time to get to the last bit of priming, which is the interior of the cockpit. And for this, I don't want to use lacquer because it's a confined interior space. So instead, I'm going to be using some Stynylrez, specifically this gray Stynylrez, because it's a kind of darker sort of gray. It's not, I won't call it dark by any means, but it's not the very pale light gray of Mr. Surfacer. I'm going to say a little prayer that the freeze that we had didn't completely bork up the Stynylrez. So I tried to keep the garage above freezing, but it was like 4, so who knows. Okay, let's hope this works. So something important to keep in mind is that none of this will be visible, pretty much. The most that will be seen will be like an impression. Because even though it's hard to see in there right now, once the blast shield thing gets installed, and once the windscreen frame goes in place, everything in here will just vanish. That is looking pretty solid. Let me go ahead and empty out the airbrush. Okay, so after all of that priming and sanding, here's where we stand. TIE Interceptor basically ready for paint. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and call an end to this first episode, and when we pick back up, we'll be moving on to dealing with some of the interior stuff, some of the canopy frame stuff, and that sort of blast shield thing, as well as the solar panels, which are going to be fun to tackle. So, thanks for watching this first installment of the 3D printed TIE Interceptor, and stay tuned for a lot more. Catch you later.